Hi, thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Laurie, I'm with London Drugs, and this is Sarah with the Canadian Mental Health Association. And today we're going to be talking about maternal mental health. And this week is Maternal Mental Health Week, and May is Maternal Mental Health Month. And so we felt it was a fantastic time to go into a bit more details and have a conversation about this very important topic. Thank you for joining me this morning, Sarah.
Oh, thanks, Laurie. I'm happy to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. My name is Sarah, and I work at the Canadian Mental Health Association, the BC Division Office, and I'm the Director of Mental Health Promotion, so I oversee a lot of provincial programs and do mental health education work, and I've been doing it for a couple of decades, and I'm very passionate about this issue and about this topic today in particular, so I'm just delighted to be here.
Great. Well, we know that the postpartum period is complicated, it's stressful, it's not always what we picture in our heads, the fairy tale that movies and TV and growing up, how we envision having a baby, what it's like. And so it can be difficult when your expectations that you have during pregnancy don't become reality when baby is born. And I know from personal experience, I have 3 children, and just, your first baby experience is one thing, but then baby number 2 is a totally different experience, and baby number 3 or 4, or however many. It doesn't mean that your first baby is the same experience as your second baby. So it's kind of a challenging, can be stressful time as well. And so today we want to share, we want to talk about it, and we're here to answer any questions that you may have. And if you're more comfortable and sharing those questions with us through private message, please definitely do that. And we are monitoring that, and those questions will get shared with us. And we hope to really have an open conversation today.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Laurie. I'm a mom too, as well as being an educator. One of the reasons I'm passionate about this area, and I have 2 young children. Doesn't feel like that long ago that this stuff was sort of hitting me, and I'm hoping that this event, because social media is not and Facebook in particular is not always the best sort of venue for seeing everyone's real life and real feelings. That's not really what it's designed to share. It's more people's best moments and favorite moments. So it can be really hard to get a window into the stresses that people are going through. But if you think about what new moms or second-time moms, who the stresses that they're going through are pretty profound, and we don't really talk about them. If you've left the workplace to be on maternity leave, you have change in your identity, change in your structure of your day, and you have change in income. Some people have had to move house to accommodate a growing family. So you have that sort of economic change as well as sort of identity stuff. And you're using your brain in a totally different way. But then you also have a whole host of other things. You have changes in your body that started in pregnancy, and they certainly don't stop after childbirth. And even if you're adoptive, you're going to be having some other kind of changes to do with how your routine is changed. And then you're going to have changes in your body image and your self-esteem and your sexual health and your sexual drive. You're going to have changes in your relationships with your partner, and sometimes good and bad relationships with your in-laws and your parents and aunties and all of that side. And your circle of friends can feel like it's shrunk sometimes, especially when you're doing it the first time. Mm-hmm. And you might be alone a lot with baby, but you might feel really like lonely. You might feel bored sometimes too. Like all of those feelings, no one ever talks about that in the books, right? And then you're also faced with sleep deprivation and all of these other sort of challenges. So it's like it's a big bundle of stuff to happen all at once. And so we're hoping with this event to give people permission to feel like down sometimes, and to be able to talk to someone if you're feeling really crappy and you're not coping, or you're having a really rough day, or you just cried in your cereal or whatever, like, because we've all been there.
Yeah, it's normal.
It's normal, and we don't talk about it. And and it doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean you're a bad mom. And those thoughts are also really common, and they're really not helpful. So we're going to give some tips for some of that stuff. And we're not going to like fix everything, but sometimes a small change can make a big difference. So
Great. So why don't we talk a little bit about the difference between baby blues and postpartum depression and anxiety.
Right. And I think our talk today is not going to be really too much about sort of moderate or severe postpartum depression or anxiety, which is sort of a topic in its own right when you're not able to function and there's a whole host of sort of symptoms. But and that's really common too. About 10% of new moms are going to go through that. And most of them will have started in pregnancy. So it's not something that just sort of magically happens after a baby's born. But what we really want to talk about is sort of the majority of new moms. Maybe they're not in that sort of moderate or severe depression or anxiety, but boy, they're feeling anxious, and boy, they're feeling down, maybe more often than they'd like to admit. And they're feeling really stressed and really overwhelmed. And if we don't sort of have some tools to deal with that, then it can creep down sort of that line of getting worse. And so we want to talk about that sort of, that really normal and common, but doesn't mean it's sort of healthy and inevitable. And I think that's the message, is that you don't have to feel that bad, and we can do some small things to change. So how do you tell if it's sort of that kind of creeping into like not feeling good and something more serious? Well, that's probably the most common question I get in my work. How do you know if it's, just a mental health problem, and how do you know it might be like an illness or something you might have to see a professional about? And really it's around how long it's lasting, how much it's impacting your life, and how much it's changed from what you were. So you're really looking for changes. Now, I know changes is really hard because we just talked about all the changes you're going through anyway, but you have a sense of what is normal for you. You've had stress before in your life, before having a baby. So you know what it looks like. And so you have a sense of what is typical for you in a stressful time and what isn't. And baby blues usually only last sort of a couple of weeks. And it's that big sort of shock, and some of it is hormone driven, but it's also just the expectation and reality kind of crashing against each other. But they usually just dissipate by the end of that first month. If you're finding that's not happening, and you're finding that you can't sort of, you can maybe barely meet baby's needs some of the time, then definitely might be something more serious, and you should definitely talk to someone, because if it's not lifting on its own, then you need help. And we would do that for any other illness. Like really, we would do that for any other health problem. That cold's not going away, you would see a doctor. That rash isn't going away, you start with your self-care, your self-management, and if that doesn't work, you seek professional help. And that's exactly what we should do with our mind and our feelings, because if we can't sort it through ourselves, we give it a little bit of space, then we need some extra tools. And we shouldn't be ashamed to get those when we need them. So
Absolutely. So for those of you who are just joining us now, my name is Laurie. I'm with London Drugs, and this is Sarah, and she's with the Canadian Mental Health Association. And today we are talking about postpartum mental health, and just wanting to share and answer any questions that you may have. So please feel free to post on the event page, or if you are would feel more comfortable, please private message us, and we will answer your questions live here today. So, Sarah, we have another question, and that's around can dads or same-sex partners, adoptive moms experience the postpartum depression or these baby blue feelings as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that's if we don't talk enough about new mums and sort of stress and low mood, we definitely don't talk about their partners or about adoptive mums too. So this isn't just about hormones. it's a factor, and it's a factor for some women more strongly than others. But it's actually a huge change and stress in our life. And yes, it has lots of positives in it, but we know from maybe weddings or career changes that some of the most stressful things in our life have been positive. So just because something's stressful doesn't mean that it's bad or that you don't appreciate it or you're not grateful. It just means it's a big change. And what stress actually means is that your coping skills and the demands don't balance out. It means that you don't have as much coping resources to deal with all of these demands in your life. That's all that stress is. So it doesn't mean that the demands are bad. It just means that you don't have the resources to deal with the demands. And sometimes we can have lots of demands and lots of support, right? We have, someone who had, I was really lucky. I had twins and I had lots of family in town. So I had more coping resources. That didn't mean I didn't struggle, but I had more ways to handle this huge demands. So that's really what the stress is about, and that's why dads are not immune to it, and same-sex partners and adoptive parents, because they're having this new person in their life. Their role is changing, their relationship is changing. Their feelings, if they're working, for example, and their relationship with the baby, this is all new for them as well, and it can sometimes be really hard, or doubly hard for dads in particular, I think, to admit that they're having that they're feeling down, because it's really hard in general for guys to talk about depression or stress, and it's also hard for them to confide in their partners, because they're like, well, how can I tell her I'm feeling down? Like, look at everything she has to deal with, right? So, but if you don't talk about it, we're social creatures, we're talking creatures. How we process our thoughts is really best done through talking or through language. That's why language is so powerful for us. And if we don't get it out, it can be really damaging to a relationship. So absolutely, this affects families. I think that's the point here, is it doesn't affect just mom. When mom is stressed, it affects baby, it affects all of the support people around her, and vice versa. Maybe mom's not doing too bad, but dad's really struggling. Well, that's going to affect the whole family too.
And the tension between that gets created between mom and dad too.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
And babies do sense this. They say that they feed off of mom and dad and their caregiver and how they're feeling. They can sense if they're happy, if they're sad, if there's tension there.
Yes, but babies are very intuitive that way. They might not understand the words that you're using. They understand tone and nonverbals very well, and that's an excellent thing. Babies are they're just brilliant at doing that. And how do we really show? We've all been in that situation of saying one thing, but actually our body language is showing our true colors. And so babies just see the true colors, right? They don't hear the language. You might be speaking Greek to them, but they can actually see how you're feeling. And only some people can really hide that very well. So and that's another stress we didn't talk about, is a lot of women do tend towards having mood and anxiety disorders more often in their life. So there are also compared to men, for example, or they certainly come forward more with them. And so you might be someone who had a history in your life or in your family, and so that increases your risk, or you might actually have stopped certain medications or tapered off them when you were trying to get pregnant or when you were pregnant. And so that increases some of the risks if you have that history. And that's something you can't change, but it does mean you have to be more attentive to those triggers that can get you. You don't want to relapse either, because that's not good. You have to weigh sort of the benefits of sort of certain treatments with what happens when you're untreated. Like, it's not an easy decision. It's complicated, but it's also the best course of action is for mom to be well. And talking with your support people to figure out how mom can be well is the goal. It should be the goal, because a good, a happy, but just a well mom is just going to help baby, it's going to help mom, and it's going to help the whole family. So if that can be the goal, then that's the most important thing.
Great. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Laurie with London Drugs, and this is Sarah with the Canadian Mental Health Association. And we're here today to share tips and have a discussion around maternal mental health. And hopefully you will learn and get some understanding and become more self-aware for what you're going through in your daily life, and that's kind of our goal and our hope. And of course, if you have any questions or feedback for us, please post it, and we'll answer those questions. If you be more comfortable, please feel free to private message us, and we'll get those questions through to us as well. So another question that we have is around some days, all I can do is the absolute minimum for my baby, and I feel so guilty for that. I'm scared if I tell anyone, they'll think that I'm a bad mother. How do I start that conversation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's also really, it's such a common fear, that guilt, that feeling less than. And I think most new moms would admit, if someone asked them, like, how often have you felt that you weren't, patient enough or efficient enough or balanced enough or pretty enough or to be a mom. And there's a lot of sociological reasons for why we do this to ourselves, but it's not helpful. It's really not helpful, that kind of guilt. And you know what? Like, I think we've all, I could certainly remember a time when, fishy crackers and a video, I just needed to have a cry. And I felt bad for not fully engaging my 100% for my baby, but I needed to realize that I couldn't do it all, and that there's no such thing as a fully, perfectly engaged, there's no such thing as a perfect mom, but there's also no such thing as a mom who's just doing all the right things all the time, because it doesn't exist. And we do ourselves a real disservice for not sort of remembering that you're going to have, like in anything in life, you're going to have peaks and valleys. You're going to have days when you're really on and feeling like you've got some really quality time, and other times when you're like, wow, you know what? I don't really like my baby today, right? I've been there. And that's usually a time when that means I have not had any me time. Like, that's actually what it means, is that I was one of those moms who realized I needed to go back to work, not just financially, but for my own brain and my own lots of things. And I swear, when I come home to my kids, I am nicer, I am more patient, they are cuter. All of that is true. They're funnier than if I had been there, and that's not true for all moms. That's what I learned about myself. But even if you don't go back to work and you're not wrestling with that, having that 1 hour break away from your baby, finding that neighbor or girlfriend or babysitter or mother-in-law or partner who can look after the child, even if you're breastfeeding, an hour, you can take an hour to do something that is just for you. Mm-hmm. So whatever, and not for the house. And that is hopefully leaving the house, unless they take the baby and you actually get to have a bubble bath or something. But something that is that you find really enjoyable, that you haven't had a moment to do, and that you give yourself permission to do that, because you will be you will feel better, but you'll also be better for your baby, and your baby will see it. They'll see you perk up, and that's we're so guilty and selfish about doing stuff like that, but I think it's just so important. And for starting the conversation, I'll share a story about I went to the mom and baby group in our local public health unit when my kids were young, and if you go to those things, they're actually really, really useful, because you get, just like these events, you get really great tips about, nutrition and teeth and safety and all sorts of things that you hadn't thought about. Plus you get to be around other moms and babies. And at first I found it was good. I got out of the house. I had to kind of, put my face on a little bit and like wear real clothes that didn't smell, and all of that was really good. But it was also, I was around these other moms and I was like, oh my gosh, I was getting those less than feelings, like their babies are dressed better than mine are. Because I had twins, so I had these two babies. So I'm like, oh, their babies are developing like faster, right? So they're like, oh, they're already like sitting up or whatever, and mine aren't doing that yet. Or I was just comparing myself constantly to, or their mom looks so together, or all of that stuff. And I found that, I think it was like the fourth session at this particular community center, they brought in a mental health speaker. And I work in mental health, so I happen to know her. And she shared her story around postpartum stress and depression and anxiety, and just really just not having a blissful fairy tale sort of first year after her son was born. And then she invited, and that association in BC runs support groups, and across Canada there's going to be similar postpartum or reproductive mental health groups. But she really invited and created a safe space for these like 12 or 15 moms to go around in a circle and share. And nobody had done that yet. We had only talked about the cute little cardigan and what, baby jumper you tried, and that, that giraffe soothing, that was all the rage back then,
Sophie.
right? Sophie, yes, exactly, right? The teething, do you need that for teething? And it was so eye-opening. We went around the circle, and every single person shared that deeper thing of, how am I really doing? How am I feeling really? And I think there was maybe one mom who said she was doing like really well. Everybody else was some degree of stressed out, burned out, overwhelmed. I think 3 moms cried as they were just talking because no one had given them permission to say that they felt so bad their parents were in Scotland and they couldn't, really engage with them very often. And anyway, it was just really moving. And that finally hit me that I was comparing myself, but we weren't actually really engaging on a deep level. And we were suddenly a much more intimate group because of that conversation. And I know some of those moms now because my kids are in first grade with some of them. We're in the same catchment. And it changed the tone. And so I'd really encourage you to go to a mom and baby group. If you don't feel you can talk to your partner, if you don't feel you can talk to your parents or a girlfriend, go to one of those groups, see if you can get a mental health or stress as one of the topics, and see how the dynamic changes. Moms want to talk about this. They are scared that no one else feels like it, but everyone else feels like it. It's one of those hidden, it's totally the elephant in the room, and we want to bring that out.
And I know from my experience too, as soon as somebody says something, it's just like that, okay.
Yes.
And then everyone will kind of join in and share, well, I'm not the perfect mom, or I am struggling at this, or I didn't get any sleep last night and I just can't handle it today, or whatever it may be. Yeah. It's great to share that, and you'll feel that you're not alone anymore.
Yes. And you'll identify, and you'll see things from a different point of view. I was sharing that I think the thing that hit me the hardest wasn't in those first 3 months, because I had public health nurses coming to visit. I had casseroles. People were bringing all sorts of stuff. And then after 3 months, that kind of starts to fall away. Yeah. So if you're someone who's not a mom, or you're doing okay and you know a new mom, remember what it's like after that 3-month window, and check in on them, because no one else is. Do you know what I mean? So for me, I was actually doing really okay because everyone was on top of me and giving me tons of support. And then in month 5, one of my girls decided to stop breastfeeding. And I enjoyed that so much. And I had tremendous guilt that I was going to be more bonded to the one who was still breastfeeding. And I talked to lactation consultants, and I did the whole thing. And some told me I was doing everything wrong, that I should never have used any bottle at all. I should only, and I was like, when you make the decisions you make with your family, my doctor said, it's really important you get 4 or 5 hours sleep, and you can't do that without having help from partners. So I felt a lot of grief, and it was really nice in that setting to actually hear other moms have grief about breastfeeding or related expectations around that, but also around experts telling them, could be sleep trainers. We have lots of mommy helpers, and some of them are amazing, and some of them are less than amazing, right? Some of them tell you, or relatives, right? Who give you advice that's very black and white. Oh, you should do this all the time. You should do this all the time. And there's usually very little universal with babies. Every baby is different. And so those shoulds can really get to you after a while. And so you have to be able to kind of critically look and say, you're not a helpful person to me right now. So hearing from other people in the group about that, but also I remember this one woman in our group who she was having the opposite problem of she felt chained to her baby because breastfeeding, because he wouldn't take a bottle. She was like, I wish he would take a bottle. I've tried to pump, he will not take a bottle. And so I feel like I cannot do anything. And so she felt the same feelings I was feeling, but for a different reason of the same issue. And it just reminded me that there's no absolute here. It's not like, that is always going to be stressful. For her, what I was describing was like freedom for her, that I could actually breastfeed or bottle. And for her it was like, oh my God, that's amazing, right? And your baby's bonding is not just about breastfeeding, right? And of course, it's ridiculous now that my kids are a little bit older. They're both attached to me like crazy. It had nothing to do with, certainly it helps as part of the package, but I was really thinking in this one track of, if I don't do this, I'm going to be a bad mom, or I didn't give myself permission to feel a bit of loss, because everyone around you is like, oh, how cute, and you're so lucky, and you're lucky, and it's really hard to counter that,
Absolutely. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Laurie with London Drugs, and this is Sarah with the Canadian Mental Health Association. And today we're having a conversation about maternal mental health and talking about feelings and that it's okay, and normalizing the stress of having a new baby, and that it's not all fairy tales and perfect all the time, and that's okay. And so please send us your questions, and we will do our best to answer them all. And if you would feel more comfortable, please definitely send us a private message, and we are monitoring those channels, and we'll answer those as well. So next question we have, Sarah, is when so much of being a new parent is worrying that your baby is doing okay, how do you know if something else, if it's something else like postpartum anxiety?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because a lot of when my kids were babies, there was in our city, there was a newborn hotline. That newborn hotline does not exist anymore, because I think it was always busy. You're always worried about, what is that bump? What is that color? Why is it green? Why, and you do have the books to tell you what to expect about different things, but you're always sort of doing this like threat assessment and just making sure everyone's safe. And and that's part of, like, I think it's sort of, we're wired to do it, right? We're wired to keep our children safe. But how do you know when it goes overboard? Well, you probably, again, like I talked about earlier, like, is it going on? Is it taking up a lot of your day? Are you feeling it a lot in your body all the time? Like, is your heart racing all the time? Are you waking up in the middle of the night in cold sweats? Like, then it's probably, unless there's something actually really seriously medically wrong with your child and they're in intensive care or something, which is a totally different situation, then it might be a sign that the anxiety is out of proportion with what's going on in your life. So it's really going to depend on each situation. But if you're not sure, check in with someone else. Again, the talking really helps. It's really hard to do this, and try to diagnose yourself. And there's so many, and postpartum anxiety can be part of depression. In fact, for new moms, usually depression will have anxiety symptoms like right in there. So instead of diagnosing yourself, it could just be, it could be in the range of just normal anxiety, which is, there's normal anxiety too. Check it out. Talk to a friend, talk to a family member, a colleague, a counselor. You might still have access to counseling through your workplace benefits. A lot of people forget that they do. Or talk to your doctor or public health nurse if you're not sure if your worry is off the charts. So, but one tip actually I think is worth, it's something that I had learned when I was younger and I had gone through depression as a young adult, was sort of trying to deal with unhelpful thoughts in general. And that's something that comes when you're stressed out. That happens regardless of if you have a new baby or not. But what do you do with those unhelpful thoughts? And we've talked about some of them, right? I'm a failure. I can't do it all. I should be able to do this. My baby should be able to do that. I should be on top of this. You name it. What are some other ones that you had or that you've heard?
I guess, like,
Unhelpful thoughts.
how's this mom able to do
Able
it?
to do it.
And I'm not.
Yes, exactly. And so all of those thoughts, what they do is they're usually not true. I mean, that one is not a fact-based one, but usually the thoughts about sort of assessing a situation are usually not true. They don't actually help us accomplish anything, and they just end up making us feel bad. So what we do is we have all these bad thoughts, and guess what? They start to trigger bad feelings, right? You think those things. And I'm having conversations with my girls now about, like, oh, you're feeling sad. What's going on in your head? Like, trying them to see the connection between how they're feeling and what's going on in their head. And when you start to feel bad, then you start to change what you do. So suddenly you're like, I feel like a bad mom. Oh, what's the point in showering? I'll just stay home today. And then so it impacts all the stuff that you do in your relationships. And then you end up doing the very opposite of what you probably would help you feel better, right? You probably should shower and maybe go outside, and that might probably perk you up. But we end up being so hard on ourselves that we just we get into this little cycle, and it can be really hurtful. So it's important to think of those thoughts. First of all, to notice that we're having them. They can become, if this is the first time that you've ever sort of had that aha moment of, oh, wow, there's a moment between like an event and my thoughts about it, or there's a connection between my thoughts and my feelings, or what are you saying? These thoughts don't necessarily mean they're fact. Like, those things, we're so automatic with our thoughts that we think them and we think it's fact. It must be fact. It's in my head, right? Like, it's just, and we just take it as true. And if we actually pause for a second and notice it as if it was in the room with us, and actually be like, oh, there, I'm doing that thing again. The first thing is noticing it. The second thing is labeling it. What am I doing right now? Am I rehearsing a conversation I'm going to have with I'm having one of those unhelpful thoughts again. Just noticing it and labeling it for what it is can really take down its power. The next thing you could do if that doesn't work is to just kind of let it be. I try to think of it like, when you have like one of those big horse flies that's going around, that comes into your kitchen, and it's really kind of annoying, but it's probably not going to sting you, but it's a fly. But it's just kind of, I suppose some people will get a fly swatter, and that's later down our list. But is you just kind of like sort of ignore it. Like, you're not trying to don't think about the thought, because that never works. Like, it never works, right? Like, don't think about the thought. Yeah, exactly. Don't think about people's eyebrows. First thing you're going to do is look in a room and you're going to stare at people's eyebrows. Yeah. So don't do that. That's not helpful. But actually just being like, okay, you're over there. I see you, but I'm not going to pay attention to you. And it's kind of like that fly in the room that's just like, it's a little bit mildly annoying. And eventually it leaves the room. Do you know what I mean? So that's why I like that metaphor, is because it's probably not going to do you harm. It's annoying because it's big and black and usually makes a big sound. It's distracting, but it actually will leave, right? So if you don't pay it any attention, that really helps. If none of those things are really helping and this bad thought is a whopper, then there's some other tricks that we would suggest. So one would be to think of that thought like a bully. That basically it is a bully. It is it's weak. It thinks it's all that, but actually there's not much behind it. So it tells you lies. It's trying to make you feel weak. It tries to tell you things you can't do. So what would you say to your baby as it grows into a toddler if it encountered that thought as a bully on the playground? You would say things to your child that we don't say to ourselves, right? So you think of it, and that can reduce the power of the thought. And then, of course, you can do some other things, which is like, what would the person who loves you most in the world say about you right now? Or what would you tell someone else who is having this thought, right? Like your best friend or your sister or whatever who's having this thought. What would you say? Why can't you say that to yourself? Why don't we ever do that, right? Like, if you were saying, oh, I'm a terrible mother, I'd be like, oh my God, Laurie, you're so not. Look what you're doing. We would look at the positive. We would reframe it. We don't do that for ourselves. We just that's not allowed. And we have to start to do that. Otherwise, we'll beat ourselves up, right? And mothers are very good at beating themselves up. So those are some simple strategies that are actually based in very effective counseling techniques called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is around how to deal with unhelpful thoughts. And it's not going to solve everything. It's not going to change your diapers for you. It's not going to give you more sleep, but it will actually put the bad thoughts where they belong, which is, framing them and kind of giving them a place. And that's something we tend to let them run amok. And once they do, then we feel rotten, and then we change our behavior, and that makes us feel more rotten. And then we can actually get really depressed. So it's an important point to talk about our thinking.
Oh, that's great. And one of the things I wanted to do today is just bring attention to these little T cards that we have set out. So London Drugs has proudly partnered with the Canadian Mental Health Association to support positive mental health. And next week, from May 7th to 13th, is Mental Health Week. And so all of these T cards will be available in all our London Drugs locations. And we encourage you to visit one of our stores and get a tea bag and be able to sit back and have a moment for yourself and enjoy your tea, and really start to talk about these things. Just like Sarah and I have today, to just start the conversation. And you will find that there's many, many other moms or other people in your life experiencing these same concerns and challenges, and you're not alone, for sure.
Oh, you're absolutely not alone. And if that's the one message you can take away from today is, that you are not the only one having these difficult feelings, and that we should give ourselves permission to talk about them. So we are just delighted and honored to be the recipient of this point of sale activity, and take some time out and have a cup of tea with someone.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And we hope you've taken some valuable tips today. And for any questions that we didn't answer here live, we will be following up and posting shortly after the event. And we hope that you join us again next time for our next live event. Thank you.